You have been waiting for something, not in a way you would admit out loud, but in the quiet underneath your decisions, the small hesitations, the plans that stay plans, the mornings where you feel almost ready but not quite. You have been waiting for a signal, a confirmation, something outside of you to finally say, now, go now, this is the one. Most people call this being careful. Some call it being spiritual. A few call it strategy. Whatever name you give it, the waiting feels responsible. It feels like wisdom. And that feeling is the most expensive lie you have ever believed. Here is what nobody tells you directly. The signal you are waiting for is not coming, not because the universe is indifferent, not because you have done something wrong, but because the signal was never separate from you to begin with. It was always a projection, your own readiness, cast outward onto a coin flip or a calendar date or a conversation that finally said the right words. You supplied the meaning. You always did. This is the part that should stop you cold. If that is true, and it is, then every moment you spent waiting for permission was a moment you spent standing in front of a mirror, asking your own reflection for directions. By the time you finish listening to this, you will not see signs the same way. You will not wait the same way. You will understand something precise and irreversible about who has always held the only authority that ever mattered. That person is not out there. That person is you. Chapter 1. The sign you waited for never existed. Across every age that human beings have lived through, there is one story that keeps repeating. It wears different clothes in different centuries. It speaks different languages in different lands, but the shape of it never changes. A person stands at the edge of a life they can almost see, waiting for something outside themselves to say go. They wait for a feeling, a signal, a door that opens without them having to push. The tragedy is not that they wait. The tragedy is what the waiting costs them. Quietly, day after day, in a currency they cannot name until it is already spent. You are listening to this right now. That tells me something. You have felt that edge. You have stood there. And some part of you already suspects that what you were waiting for was never coming from out there at all. Here is the question this chapter is going to hold for a while. What if the sign you have been waiting for has already arrived, and you have been the one delivering it every single day without realizing it? Sit with that. Do not answer it yet. Let me tell you about Renata first. Renata was 29 when she decided she was almost ready. She had a notebook, several notebooks actually, one for her business ideas, one for her financial goals, one for what she called her vision. She had filled about 40 pages across all three over the course of 3 years. She had also taken 2 online courses, listened to hundreds of hours of podcasts on building wealth and starting businesses, and told her closest friend Dara no fewer than 6 times that this was going to be her year. She was not lazy. That is important. Renata worked a full-time job in logistics, managed her own apartment, sent money home to her mother twice a month, and still carved out an hour most evenings to educate herself. She was, by any honest measure, one of the most intentional people in her circle. But she had a rule she had never written down and never spoken aloud. A rule that lived somewhere below the level of conscious thought. The rule was this: she would start when the right sign appeared. Sometimes the sign she was looking for was a feeling of total readiness. Sometimes it was a specific number in her savings account. Sometimes it was a mentor who would materialize and confirm that her idea was viable. Sometimes, on harder days, it was simply a run of good luck, some small proof that the universe was aligned in her favor. She kept looking up, the sky kept being empty, and another month passed. You already know Renata. You might be Renata, or you might have been Renata 2 years ago, or you might be watching her from close enough distance that her story lands in your chest like a stone dropping into still water. The waiting is not unique to her. That is the thing. The waiting is one of the oldest patterns in human experience. It has been kept alive not because it works, but because it feels like wisdom when you are inside it. Here is what the waiting actually feels like from the inside. It feels responsible. It feels patient. It feels like you are a person who takes things seriously, who does not rush, who respects the process. And every piece of cultural language you have ever absorbed has reinforced that feeling. Wait for the right moment. Trust the timing. Everything happens for a reason. These phrases are not evil. Some of them contain real truth in specific circumstances. But they have been applied so broadly, so casually to so many lives, that they have become the most elegant trap ever built. They make the cage feel like a garden. Look back at the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. Not in a general way. Be specific. Where were you living? What were you earning? What were you planning? And what were you waiting for before you could start? Now ask yourself how much of that plan became action, and how much of it became more planning. This is not an accusation. This is a mirror. If the reflection is uncomfortable, that discomfort is information. It is the most valuable thing you have heard all day. The external validation loop is what I am going to call the system that trains people to wait. It is not a conspiracy. It is not designed by anyone sitting in a room deciding to hold you back. It emerged naturally from culture, language, spiritual traditions that were never meant to produce passivity, and a psychological need for safety as old as the human brain itself. You did not choose it. It was handed to you before you were old enough to question it. And it has one defining feature. It places the source of permission outside you, always, every time, without exception. Go to school first, then start your career. Save enough first, then invest. Learn more first, then teach. Get more experience first, then lead. Feel more certain first, then commit. Each of these can sound reasonable in isolation. All of them together form a complete system for deferring your actual life indefinitely. The condition for permission is always on the other side of one more threshold. When you reach that threshold, another one appears. This is not progress. This is a treadmill dressed up as a road. Now here is where the real diagnosis lands. This is the part that most conversations about waiting leave out entirely. Signs are not neutral. You do not simply encounter them in the world and react to them. Your mind selects them. The mind that is afraid to move scans its environment and finds confirmation that waiting is wise. It notices the business that failed. It notices the friend who tried something similar and struggled. It notices every signal in the noise that justifies remaining still. It does this automatically, without effort, with complete sincerity, and without ever identifying itself as fear. The mind that is ready to move does the exact opposite. It scans the same environment and finds confirmation that movement is possible. It notices the person who started with less. It notices the gap in the market that seems obvious now that it is looking. It notices every signal in the noise that justifies taking the next step. Same world, completely different signal. This is the revelation that cuts through everything else. Signs are not sent to you. They are selected by you. The sky is not empty or full. The sky is a screen, and what gets projected onto it comes from inside you, not down from it. Renata learned this from a woman named Cecile, who ran a small consulting business out of a shared office space downtown. Renata met her at a networking event she had almost skipped. Cecile had started her business with 4 clients, no savings cushion, and a 3-week-old baby at home. Renata asked her, almost reflexively, what sign had finally told her the time was right. Cecile looked at her for a moment without answering. Then she said, "The time was not right. It was never going to be right. I just decided that I was the right person and I went." Renata drove home that night with Cecile's words sitting in the passenger seat beside her. She did not launch her business the next morning. That is not how this works. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a different kind of waiting, just with more drama in it. But something shifted in her that evening, something small and precise and permanent. She stopped looking up. She stopped waiting for the sky to tell her something. She started asking a different question, one that pointed inward instead of outward. That question is the one you need to carry with you through the rest of this book, not the question of when the right moment will arrive, the question of what you are already signaling to yourself, right now, through every choice you make and every choice you defer. Because the answer to that question tells you everything. You have been waiting for a permission slip. The space where it was supposed to come from has always been empty, not because the universe is indifferent and not because you are unworthy, but because the permission slip was yours to write from the very beginning, and no system on earth can write it for you. A little later, we will reach an idea about readiness that cuts across the standard story. Once that lands, it changes how you act every single morning from that point forward. For now, hold this. The sign you were waiting for is not late. It was never in the mail. The signal was always you. Chapter 2. Waiting is not patience, it is fear in a costume. Almost everyone who is waiting for the right moment believes the same thing about themselves. They believe they are being wise, patient, strategic. They are wrong, not slightly wrong. The version of waiting most people practice is not wisdom dressed in a calm face. It is fear dressed in wisdom's clothes, standing at the door of your life, politely explaining why today is not the right day to walk through it. The reason this lie is so hard to catch is that it feels almost identical to real patience. Almost. That difference, that small, sharp gap between the two, is what this chapter is about. So here is the question that will follow us for a while. How do you know which one you are actually doing? Hold that question. We will come back to it. But first, you need to see the costume for what it is. You already heard at the end of the last chapter that the sign you were waiting for was never in the mail. The signal was always you. But knowing that in theory and feeling it in your body are two entirely different experiences. Most people hear a truth like that and think, yes, that resonates. And then they wait for it to feel more certain before they act on it. Do you see what just happened there? They took a lesson about waiting and they waited to apply it. That is how deep the pattern runs. That is how well the costume fits. Here is what real patience looks like. A farmer does not plant seeds in frozen ground and call it patience. She reads the soil. She prepares the tools. She knows which week the frost ends in her specific county, not because she is guessing, but because she has done the work of understanding her actual conditions. When she waits, the waiting is full of action. It has texture and direction. Now think about the waiting you have been doing. Does yours have texture? Does it have direction? Or does it have a reason that changes every few months, a new explanation for why right now is still not the time? The economy, the relationship, the debt that needs to clear first, the course you have not finished, the version of yourself that feels more ready. That is the costume doing its work. Return to the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. Sit with that for a moment. 3 years ago, what were you waiting for? What was the thing you told yourself you needed before you could begin? And when that thing arrived, if it arrived, did you begin? Or did the waiting simply find a new reason to continue, wearing a new outfit, carrying a new excuse that sounded just as reasonable as the last one? This is the mirror moment, not a comfortable one, but the discomfort is the point. Patience that is real produces something in the waiting period. It produces skill, or savings, or clarity, or connection. When it finally meets timing, there is fuel ready to burn. Fear wearing patience's costume produces nothing except a longer list of reasons and a shorter window to act. You have felt that shortening window. That pressure in the chest that arrives when you see someone your age accomplishing something you told yourself you would get to. That feeling is not envy. It is your own voice, rising up from somewhere deeper than thought, trying to tell you that the waiting was never the plan. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Marcus was 31 years old and had been telling himself for 4 years that he was going to start the small landscaping business he had sketched out in a notebook. It lived in his second desk drawer. He had the notebook. He had the drawings. He had done the math on the startup costs 3 separate times and confirmed 3 separate times that the numbers worked. He had the skills. He had worked weekends for his uncle's property management company since he was 19 and knew the work better than most people who already ran businesses like the one he imagined. He was waiting for a sign, not a dramatic sign, just something, a feeling of certainty, a moment when the fear dropped away and clarity arrived and everything felt aligned. He told himself this was patience. He told himself he was being responsible. He told a friend once, without irony, that the timing just was not right yet. Then one Tuesday in October, his uncle sold the property management business to a regional chain. Marcus lost the weekend work that had always been there as a net beneath him. The net disappeared. And Marcus, out of something closer to necessity than courage, filed for his business license that same week. Within 18 months, he had 4 regular clients and 2 employees. What changed? Not the business plan, not the market, not the economy or the timing or his level of skill or readiness. What changed was the removal of the thing he was hiding behind. The waiting had been protection. Comfortable, reasonable sounding, completely believable protection. Let that sit for one beat. Because here is the thing about protection. You do not always know what you are protecting yourself from until it is gone. Marcus did not think he was hiding. He genuinely believed he was waiting for the right signal. But the real signal, the one he was waiting for, was never a feeling of certainty. It was always the decision to move without it. This is the core of what the costume does. It does not feel like a disguise. It feels like discernment. It presents itself as maturity, as wisdom, as the kind of long-term thinking that separates successful people from impulsive ones. In doing so, it turns the very language of wisdom against you. It weaponizes patience. It takes a genuine virtue, the real kind, the kind the farmer practices, and wears it like a mask over something that, if you named it plainly, you would not let yourself keep doing. Fear. Plain and specific fear. Fear that it will not work and you will have to face what that means about you. Fear that it will work and you will have to live inside a bigger version of your life. Fear that you are not who you think you are. Fear that you are exactly who you think you are and the world will simply not cooperate. These are not small fears. They have weight. They have history. But they are not the same thing as a reason. Further on, we will reach an idea about fear, about whether removing it should come before action or after that cuts across the standard story. When that becomes clear, it changes what you do in the morning. For now, stay with the costume. The cultural machinery around you rewards waiting. It calls waiting thoughtful. It calls waiting humble. It builds entire spiritual frameworks around the idea that the universe will send you a signal when the time is right, and your job is simply to remain open and receptive and aligned. There is something worth keeping in all of that. But somewhere in the telling, the permission slip got handed to the sky instead of kept in your own hands. The empty sky became the authority, and the sky, by definition, is empty. It does not send paperwork. It does not caution your business license or validate your decision to leave the job that is slowly grinding you flat. The sky watches. You decide. The permission slip was always yours, not because positive thinking makes things happen. Not because you are the center of the universe and your desires have cosmic backing, but because the actual mechanics of any result you want require decisions. Decisions require a decider, and the only decider present in your life at every relevant moment is you. Waiting for external validation to arrive before you decide is not openness. It is an empty chair at the table where your life is being discussed. Now here is the distinction you have been waiting for since the first question this chapter raised. How do you know if your waiting is real patience or fear in a costume? Real patience looks like this. You are doing something now that directly serves the outcome you want later. You have chosen a specific time or condition that will trigger your next move. You have a date. You have a threshold. The preparation is active. The waiting has a shape. Fear in a costume looks like this. You are waiting for a feeling. You are waiting for certainty. You are waiting for the sign that will finally make the move feel safe enough to take. The condition is vague. The timeline is open. And every month that passes, the condition shifts just enough to remain just out of reach. One final thing, and it is a question, not an answer. What would you do today, not someday, not when things settle, not after the next thing resolves? What would you do today if you already had the sign? Chapter 3. The universe does not send memos. Waiting for the universe to reply is one of the most expensive habits a person can have. That sounds like a dismissal of everything spiritual, everything intuitive, everything you may have been told about patience and trust and divine timing. It is not a dismissal. It is a precise description of what waiting actually costs, and why the mechanism you are hoping will send you a green light does not work the way you were taught. Here is the tension that demands an answer. If reality were truly a system that responded to sincere requests, then the most earnest, most hopeful, most prayerful people would also be the most financially secure. You know that is not what you see. You see people who prayed hard and stayed broke. You see people who asked and asked and asked, and what came back was more silence. Not because the universe is cruel, not because they asked wrong, but because asking is not the mechanism. Being is the mechanism. And once you understand what that actually means in terms of how your brain processes reality every single day, you will stop scanning the sky for a memo that was never going to arrive. That question, Why does earnest asking so rarely produce a matching result? Is one this chapter is going to sit inside for a while. Hold it. We will close it completely before the end. Think about what your brain is actually doing right now, in this moment. Neuroscientists call it the reticular activating system, but you can call it your brain's filter. You have roughly 11 million bits of information hitting your senses every second. You consciously process about 40 of them. 40. Your brain is not a camera recording everything equally. It is an editor. It decides, based on what it already believes is important, what makes the final cut. Here is where it gets precise. The filter does not select randomly. It selects based on identity, based on what you already believe yourself to be. If you believe, at a deep and settled level, that you are someone who notices opportunity, you will notice opportunity. Not because more of it suddenly exists, because you were walking past it before and your filter was categorizing it as irrelevant. The moment your identity says this matters to me, the filter changes. What was invisible becomes visible. What was noise becomes signal. This is not metaphor. This is the documented, replicated neurological function of confirmation bias married to identity. And the reason it matters so much is this. The world you are experiencing right now is not a neutral world. It is a world filtered through the identity you are currently holding. The version of reality you see is not the version of reality that exists. It is the version your current self-concept allows through. So when you are waiting for a sign, what are you actually doing? You are asking reality to behave like a mailbox. You are picturing a universe that processes your requests, sorts them, and delivers instructions. First-class mail, a clear directive, permission to proceed. And on the days when you do not receive it, you wait another day. You refresh. You look for symbols in license plates and overheard conversations and the way a certain song came on at a specific moment. You are not crazy for doing this. You were taught to do this quietly by a culture and sometimes by a spiritual tradition that confused petition with activation. But reality is not a mailbox. Reality is a mirror. A mirror does not send you messages. A mirror shows you what is already present. It does not give you instructions. It does not tell you who to become. It reflects who you are. And if you stand in front of a mirror expecting it to hand you a letter, you will wait in front of that mirror for the rest of your life. This is the mechanism. This is what the chapter is for, not inspiration. The mechanism. Let me introduce you to a woman named Priya. She was 31, living in a mid-sized city, working a job that paid her enough to stay comfortable but not enough to feel free. Every year she told herself she would start something of her own. A small product business she had been sketching in notebooks for 4 years. She had the idea fully formed. She had done the research. She even had a small amount of savings set aside. But she was waiting for something to confirm the move was safe. She would describe it as waiting for clarity, or the right time, or a sign that this was what she was supposed to do. What Priya noticed in that waiting period was that she kept seeing news stories about small businesses failing. She kept finding statistics about first-year startups folding. She kept meeting people who had tried something similar and pulled back. Every piece of evidence that reached her confirmed the same message. This is risky, wait, not yet. She finally started. Not because a sign arrived, but because a friend who loved her said something simple and cutting. The friend said, "Do you notice what you are reading?" Priya looked at her phone. Her recent searches were all about risk, about failure, about timing. Her brain had been in confirmation mode, yes, but confirming what? Confirming the identity she had quietly, privately adopted. The identity of someone who was not yet ready, who was smart enough to be careful, who would eventually, someday, move. The day she started, nothing external changed. The market was the same. The risk was the same. What changed was the identity she fed to her filter. And the moment that changed, what her brain let through changed. Opportunities she had seen before but dismissed as too small or too soon started looking like entry points. Connections she had written off as coincidental started looking like resources. The world did not become more generous. Her filter became more honest about what it had been blocking. Her business took 18 months to become profitable. It was hard. But here is what she said when she looked back. She said she was shocked by how much had always been there that she simply had not been allowing herself to see. The world did not change. The mirror changed because she changed what she brought to it. Now here is your mirror moment. Picture the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. The things you were waiting on then. The signs you were hoping would arrive. Think about how many of them came. And then think about what actually moved you forward when anything did move. Was it the sign? Or was it a moment when something inside you shifted and you stopped asking for permission and just began? You already know the answer. You have always known the answer. The friction was never the absence of a sign. The friction was the gap between the identity you were performing and the identity you needed to inhabit for your filter to start working in your favor. Here is the important distinction. This is not about pretending. Fake confidence is not an identity shift. It is a costume, and your brain knows the difference between a costume and a belief. When actors talk about the method, about fully inhabiting a character, they are describing something real and neurologically verifiable. Partial commitment produces partial perception. Wholehearted identity adoption changes the filter, fully. Not because you tricked yourself, because you told the most honest version of the truth. I am now someone for whom this is true. The permission slip you were waiting for from the universe. The memo. The clear divine signal. None of it was ever meant to arrive from outside. The permission slip was always yours to write, not because you are delusional enough to manufacture outcomes through belief alone. Because the outcomes available to you in any given window of time are substantially shaped by what your filter decides to let into your awareness. And your filter takes its orders from your identity. The empty sky is not evidence of silence. The empty sky is a mirror. It shows you what you brought to it. If you brought a self-concept organized around waiting, the sky reflects waiting. If you bring a self-concept organized around motion, around the reasonable and grounded belief that you are someone who acts on what they see, the sky starts showing you what you need to move. Soon, we will reach an idea about patience that cuts across the standard story. After that clicks, it changes how you use time. But right now, hold this. You asked earlier why earnest asking so rarely produces a matching result. The answer is not that the universe is indifferent to sincerity. The answer is that sincerity in asking is not the same as solidity in being. A sincere request from an identity that does not believe it deserves the answer, or is not yet ready for the answer, or is still fundamentally organized around the experience of not having the answer produces what? More of the same, not as punishment, as reflection. The mirror gives back what you bring to it. A person who is solid in an identity does not ask for permission. They make decisions consistent with who they are. And reality, meaning the filtered slice of reality their brain processes, begins to organize around those decisions. Not magically, not instantly, mechanically. The brain doing what brains do, confirming the operative belief and routing attention toward what the operative identity marks as relevant. This is the mechanism. Not a mailbox, a mirror. So the question you are carrying into the next chapter is this. If you stopped petitioning and started being, What is the one identity statement you would have to make true first? Chapter 4. Every sign you got was one you made. Something is leaving you right now, not in a moment of crisis, not in a dramatic loss you can point to and name. Right now, quietly, the cost is accumulating. Every day you spend scanning the sky for a signal that will tell you it is finally time to move, that is not a neutral day. That is compounding cost. The opportunity you are holding at arm's length is not just this month's delay. It is the income that delay would have become. It is the clarity that action would have given you. It is the version of yourself you are postponing. That person exists right now, in potential, waiting for you to stop asking and start being. And here is the part nobody tells you. The thing you are waiting for is not outside you. The mechanism that creates every sign you see, every confirmation you receive, every meaningful coincidence that makes your heart speed up, that mechanism lives inside your own skull. Once you understand how it actually works, you will never wait for permission the same way again. A question came forward in the last chapter, and that thread is still live. If you stopped petitioning and started being, what is the one identity statement you would have to make true first? Hold that question. By the time this chapter is over, you will understand exactly why you keep receiving the signs you receive, and not the ones you want. Here is something most people never learn about their own mind. Inside your brain, nestled at the top of the spinal cord, is a small cluster of nerve cells called the reticular activating system. The name is scientific, but the function is simple. It is a filter. Every second you are alive, your senses are flooded with roughly 11 million pieces of information. Sound, light, temperature, texture, peripheral movement, scent, all of it pouring in at once. Your conscious mind can only handle about 50 of those pieces at any given moment. So the reticular activating system decides which 50 make it through. Everything else is discarded before you ever notice it. Think about that for a moment. Your brain is throwing away millions of data points every single second. You have no idea it is happening. Now here is where it gets interesting. The reticular activating system does not filter randomly. It filters according to what you have told it matters. It is not intelligent in the way you are intelligent. It does not judge or question your instructions. It simply executes them. You tell it what is important through your focus, your beliefs, your self-concept, your emotional energy, and it goes looking for evidence. Every scan of a room, every half-heard conversation, every car that catches your eye on the highway, every article that somehow finds you, all of it is the reticular activating system doing exactly what you instructed it to do, finding what you told it to find. The signs you receive are not sent to you. They are selected by you. Now meet Renata. Renata was 31 years old, working as an office administrator for a mid-sized logistics company in a city where she did not particularly want to stay. She had been thinking about starting a small product business for 2 years. She had a notebook with sketches in it. She had researched suppliers 3 separate times and stopped 3 times because nothing felt certain enough. She was waiting, she told herself, for the right sign. Something that would confirm the timing was right, that she would not fail, that the universe was with her. On a Tuesday morning in February, Renata did something different. Not dramatic. She did not quit her job or write a business plan. She simply made a quiet internal decision, alone at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold, that she was going to stop treating herself as someone waiting to become a business owner and start treating herself as someone who already was one. A small shift, almost embarrassingly small, but she chose a single identity statement and made it true inside her own chest before she stood up from that table. That day, she noticed 3 things she had never noticed before. On her commute, she passed a storefront that had been empty for months. That morning, she saw the small handwritten sign in the window saying the space was available for weekend pop-up markets. She had walked that block 40 times. The sign had always been there. At lunch, a colleague she barely spoke to mentioned, almost to no one in particular, that her sister had just sold out a small run of handmade goods through a local vendor site and was already reordering materials. Renata heard it. She had eaten lunch in that break room hundreds of times. Conversations like that had certainly happened before. That evening, a video appeared in her feed about a woman who had started a product business from a rented storage unit and now had a waiting list. Renata watched the whole thing. She had been served similar content before. She had scrolled past it. None of those 3 things materialized from thin air. They had all been there in some form on previous days in previous weeks. What changed was not the world. What changed was the filter. That is not a metaphor. That is biology. Here is the open loop you need to sit with, and we will close it before this chapter ends. If the reticular activating system filters for what you have told it matters, who exactly is doing the telling? This question is more important than it sounds. If the answer were simply conscious intention, all you would have to do is decide to notice opportunity and opportunity would appear. But you have probably tried that. You have probably told yourself to focus on the positive, to look for possibilities, to stay open. And it probably helped a little, then faded. The reason it faded is that conscious intention is only one layer of the instruction. There is a deeper one. Your sense of who you are is louder than any intention you set. The reticular activating system filters not just for what you want to see. It filters for what someone like you would see. It is constantly reconciling incoming data with your self-concept. And if your self-concept says, at its deepest legible level, that you are someone who almost succeeds, someone who is not quite ready, someone who needs more confirmation before moving, then the filter executes those instructions loyally. It will show you evidence of your own unreadiness. It will surface every reason to wait. It will make the world look like a place that is not quite aligned for you yet, not because the world is hostile, because the filter is doing exactly what you trained it to do. Revisit the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. Not the facts of your life, the job, the apartment, the bank account. Think about how you thought about yourself. Think about what you silently believed you were allowed to have. Think about the signs you received in that period. Were they signs that confirmed hesitation? Signs that suggested you were not yet ready? Or were there signs of possibility that you simply did not notice, did not trust, did not act on? The same external world was available to you then. The filter was different. This is what confirmation bias means when you take it seriously. It is not just that you notice what you already believe. It is that your perceptual architecture is actively built to surface evidence of your own self-concept and quietly suppress everything that contradicts it. You are not receiving signs from the universe. You are manufacturing them, every single time. The universe is offering the same sprawling, indifferent field of raw data it always offers. Your reticular activating system walks through that field every moment of every day, cutting what matches your filter and leaving everything else standing. So here is the thing that changes everything. If you are the manufacturer of every sign you receive, then the permission slip you have been waiting for was always blank. It was always in your hand. You have been holding a blank permission slip and looking at the sky, asking for someone to sign it. Nobody was ever going to sign it. That is not cruelty. That is simply how the mechanism works. The sky is empty. The sky has always been empty, and you are the signal. Now close the loop. The question was, who is doing the telling? Who instructs the reticular activating system about what to filter for? The answer is your operating identity, not your goals, not your wishes, not what you say you want. Your operating identity is the self-concept that runs underneath everything. The silent declaration you make about who you are on a normal day, when no one is watching, when you are not performing positivity or ambition. It is the identity you default to. And it is the one giving your reticular activating system its instructions every waking hour. This is what Renata changed at that kitchen table. Not her goals, her identity. She stopped being someone who was planning to become and started being someone who already was. Her filter updated instantly. The world did not change. Her manufacturing system changed what it was looking for, and the world responded with exactly what she was now built to see. Later on, we will reach an idea about motivation, and once you see the contradiction resolve, the entire idea of waiting for inspiration will stop making sense to you that cuts across the standard story. For now, understand this. The reticular activating system is a sign manufacturing system. It is precise, it is loyal, and it is completely responsive to the operating identity you carry. Give it a small, scared, hesitant identity, and it will cover your world in small, scared, hesitating evidence. Give it the identity of someone who is already the thing they intend to become, and the filter calibrates. The signs change, not because the world sent new ones, because you started manufacturing different ones. You were never waiting for a sign. You were waiting to become the kind of person whose filter could finally see what was already there. Chapter 5. Permission was always a trick question. Waiting for permission is not humility. It sounds like it. It looks exactly like patience and self-awareness and spiritual maturity. But waiting for someone else to tell you that you are ready is not a virtue. It is an old survival skill that has long since outlived the danger it was built to handle. That stops many people cold when they first hear it. Permission-seeking feels right. It feels responsible. It feels like the kind of grounded, measured quality that separates wise people from reckless ones, which is exactly why it is so difficult to see what it actually is. By the end of this chapter, you are going to recognize the specific moment in your life when that pattern was installed, and you are going to understand why it no longer serves you the way it once did. You were waiting to become the kind of person whose filter could finally see what was already there. That sentence deserves to sit for just a moment. The filter was never the problem. The waiting was. And the waiting, that particular brand of patient, deferential, eyes-on-the-floor waiting, did not come from nowhere. It was taught, not in a classroom, not in a lecture. It was taught in hundreds of small daily interactions that shaped what felt safe and what felt dangerous when you were young enough that safety was everything. Here is a question worth sitting inside before we move on. When was the last time you started something, truly started, not just thought about starting, without first looking for a signal from someone outside yourself that it was acceptable to begin? Think about that. For most people in their 20s and early 30s who feel behind, who feel like they are always one step removed from the life they can almost picture, the honest answer is uncomfortable. The honest answer is almost never. There is a woman named Diane, 41 years old, who grew up in a house where her mother made every decision by committee. Not a literal committee, but nothing moved in that house until everyone had weighed in. Dinner waited for her father's nod. Plans were revised when an aunt raised an eyebrow. Diane learned early and well that action without approval was not just risky. It was a kind of betrayal. It meant you thought your judgment was worth more than the group's. And in that particular household, that was the worst thing a person could imply. So Diane became very, very good at reading rooms. She became fluent in subtle cues. She learned to hold her own desires at arm's length until she received some external confirmation that they were legitimate. She was celebrated for this, called mature, called considerate, called wise beyond her years. She arrived at 38 with a small consultancy she had thought about launching for 6 years. 6 years of market research that was really just hesitation dressed in spreadsheets. 6 years of asking the right people if they thought it was a good idea. Every single one of them said yes. And still she waited. Because the yes she was listening for was not coming from outside her. It had never been out there. And she could not hear the one she had been carrying the entire time, because no one had ever told her it counted. Sit with Diane for just a second before you let the lesson arrive. Diane is not a cautionary tale about laziness. She is not someone who lacked drive or intelligence or ambition. She had all three in quantities that would have alarmed a less obedient child. What Diane had was a piece of code running in her operating system, deep in the background, quiet, invisible, doing its job the way code does, and that code had one instruction: do not move without clearance. That is the metaphor worth spending time with. You are not broken. You never were. The patterns running inside you right now were written by a very intelligent, very adaptive version of you that was doing exactly what needed to be done to stay safe in an environment that made safety conditional on approval. That is not weakness. That is ingenuity. A child who learns that the people who feed them and protect them become more predictable and more generous when they ask first. That child is demonstrating a sophisticated form of intelligence. The code was good code. It did exactly what it was written to do. The problem is that the code is still running on hardware that has completely changed. You are not in that house anymore. The approval you needed then, to eat, to be held, to be seen as good, you are no longer dependent on anyone else to provide. You have resources. You have agency. You have the actual legal and practical capacity to make decisions about your own life without consequence from anyone who once held power over your survival. But the legacy software does not know that. It cannot know that on its own. It just keeps running, looking for clearance, waiting for the signal that never comes, because the signal it was designed to look for no longer exists in the world you actually live in. This is the part of the conversation that matters most, not the metaphor, what the metaphor reveals. The permission slip you have been waiting for, the sign, the green light, the moment when someone finally sees what you see in yourself and says, yes, now go, that slip was always yours to write. Every single time you looked outside yourself for it, you were asking the empty sky to hand you something that was already in your pocket. That sounds poetic. It is also a precise description of a mechanical error. When you look to others for permission to pursue a financial goal, to start a business, to change careers, to charge more for your work, to stop apologizing for the size of your ambitions, you are running a process designed for a different environment. And the cruelest part is that the process feels virtuous. It feels like you are being careful. It feels like you are honoring the people around you. It feels spiritually correct, because there is an entire cultural system, not just your family, but religion, education, social media, every institutional structure you have ever moved through that rewards the people who wait. Waiting looks like patience. Waiting looks like faith. Waiting looks like you trust the process. And every time someone validates your waiting, the code gets a little more entrenched. Call up the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was, not in the abstract specifically. Think about one thing you wanted then that you did not pursue. Think about what you told yourself the reason was. Was it timing? Was it preparation? Was it that you needed to know more, earn more, become more before you were qualified to begin? And now ask yourself honestly, did the people you were waiting for approval from ever actually grant it? Or did you simply find a new reason to wait? That is the mirror. Hold it for as long as you need to, because there is something underneath that pattern worth treating with enormous care. The intelligence that produced it was real. The environment that required it was real. The fear that motivated it was a legitimate, proportionate response to real conditions. You are not being asked to shame the version of you that learned to wait. That version kept you functional. That version kept relationships intact and bodies safe and families held together under pressure. Permission seeking was not a flaw in your character. It was a feature of your survival. But features built for one environment become bugs in another. And you are in a different environment now. As this book keeps moving, we will reach an idea about confidence that cuts across the standard story. Once you grasp that turn, it changes how you act on ordinary days, not just significant ones. For now, stay here. The question this chapter opened with, when was the last time you began something without first looking outside for clearance? That question has an answer you can work with. Because the moment you can identify the pattern clearly, you stop being operated by it. Not immediately, not completely, but the code running in the background can only run invisibly when you do not know it is there. Naming it is not the same as deleting it. But naming it is the beginning of choosing when to let it run and when to override it. Diane eventually launched her consultancy. It took another 8 months after the realization because the code does not disappear overnight. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something faster than it can be delivered. But she launched, without a committee, without unanimous approval, with 2 people who thought it was risky and 1 who actively discouraged it. She launched because she finally understood that she had been looking for something the room was constitutionally incapable of providing. The room could give her opinion. It could give her feedback and experience and perspective. What the room could not give her was authority over her own life. That was always hers. It was always yours too. The empty sky is not withholding the signal. The empty sky has been waiting for you to stop staring at it and realize that the signal you are transmitting right now today, with everything you already know and everything you already are, is the only signal that was ever required. The permission slip was never lost. You have been sitting on it. The question now is not whether you have permission to begin. The question is, what have you been postponing that the waiting can no longer honestly protect you from? Chapter 6. Timing is a story you tell to stay still. Something is leaving you right now, and it has no dramatic exit. There is no moment of departure you can point to. It does not slam a door or send a farewell. It simply goes daily in the space between the life you are living and the one you have been preparing to start. The money you are not earning is not just absent income. It is the compound return on that income. It is the negotiating confidence that comes from financial footing you do not yet have. It is the version of you who made the decision 6 months ago and is already somewhere different. That version is not lost. But every day you hold the story that the timing is not right, you push that version slightly further away. Not with failure, with patience. And that is the part no one warns you about. Patience, aimed at the wrong thing, is just another word for cost. The question the last chapter left you with was honest, and it was not easy. What have you been postponing that the waiting can no longer honestly protect you from? Hold that. This chapter is going to name the mechanism behind the postponement, the specific story that keeps the protection in place. And once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it. The story is called timing. Not time, timing. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. Time is real. Time passes. Opportunities exist inside windows that open and close, and some of those windows are genuinely narrow. None of that is in dispute. But timing, the concept that there is a cosmically correct moment for your move, a moment that will announce itself with enough clarity to finally make action feel safe, that is not a fact about the world. That is a story you assembled from pieces of other people's fear and wrapped around yourself like evidence. This section starts with an unanswered question while the chapter unfolds. You have probably experienced a moment when something worked the first time you tried it before you were ready, and you told yourself it was luck. The reason that happened matters more than you know. Hold it. Bring to mind the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. Not in a vague, general way, actually place yourself there. The apartment, the account balance, the conversations you were having with yourself at 2 in the morning. What were you waiting for then? What signal, what confirmation, what arrangement of external circumstances was going to tell you it was time? Here is the harder question. Did that signal ever arrive? Or did something shift inside you eventually, and you moved despite the absence of it, and the world simply responded to that movement? That shift. That is what this chapter is about. There is a woman named Renata who worked for 7 years as a graphic designer inside a mid-size marketing agency. She was good. Her colleagues knew it. Her clients felt it in the work. And for 4 of those 7 years, she carried the idea of going independent, taking her own clients, setting her own rates, building something that was hers. She had a folder on her desktop called Someday. Inside it, she kept rate sheets she had designed herself, a draft website she revised every few months, and 3 emails she had written to potential clients that she never sent. The timing was never right. The economy was uncertain. She did not have 6 months of savings. Her lease was up in 4 months, and she did not want to do it right before a move. Then she moved, and she needed to settle in. Then the agency got a new project, and she felt the loyalty pull. Then the project ended, and she worried the gap meant the market was soft. Every reason was real. None of it was the reason. What was actually happening was simpler and harder than any of those circumstances. Renata had not yet decided who she was. She was treating the launch of her independent practice as something that would happen to her once conditions aligned, rather than something that would come from her once she claimed it. The folder called Someday was not a plan. It was a shrine to a version of herself she was waiting for permission to become. One Tuesday in November, her agency lost its largest client. The layoffs were polite and they were fast. By noon, she had a box and a handshake. By 3 in the afternoon, sitting in her car with her laptop bag on the passenger seat, she opened her email, not to job search. She opened those 3 drafts. She sent all 3 before dinner, not because the timing was right, because there was nothing left to protect. 2 of those 3 people wrote back within a week. She did not succeed because November was the right month. She did not succeed because losing her job was the universe's signal that she was ready. She succeeded because she removed the story that was standing between her identity and her action. The world did not wait for her. It responded to her. It responded the moment she stopped waiting for it. That is not an inspirational accident. That is a mechanism. Here is what the mechanism actually is. Timing, as most people use it, is a function of identity, not calendar. When you say the timing is not right, what you most often mean, underneath the practical concerns, beneath the real and valid logistics, is that you do not yet feel like the person who does this thing. The timing feels wrong because the identity feels unconfirmed. And the cruel loop inside that logic is this. You are waiting for external timing to confirm an identity that can only be confirmed by you. The world does not send permission slips. You have been looking at an empty sky, reading weather into clouds that are not there, waiting for an atmospheric condition that is never going to form on its own. And every week that passes inside that waiting is not neutral. It is cost, the compounding kind. Now, this is the moment where the chapter gets honest in a way that most books in this space refuse to be. There are real constraints. There are genuine seasons in a life that make certain moves harder. A new parent with no childcare and a depleted savings account faces a different set of available actions than someone with no dependents and a flexible schedule. That is not the same as divine timing. That is logistics. Logistics can be worked with, worked around, and planned through. They are solvable problems. They do not require waiting. They require engineering. What is not a logistics problem is the feeling of not being ready. That feeling is identity speaking. And here is the distinction that changes everything. Logistics respond to planning, but the feeling of readiness responds to decision. You do not become ready by waiting. You become ready by deciding you are, and then letting your actions confirm that decision until your nervous system catches up with what you already chose. That is not a motivational claim. That is how it actually works. The confidence you are waiting for is built by the actions you are waiting to feel confident enough to take. There is no other sequence. Anyone who has ever built anything real will tell you in private that they never felt fully ready. They felt ready enough. They decided that enough was enough, and they moved. So here is the question that has been waiting since the beginning of this chapter. That moment you have experienced, when something worked the first time you tried it before you were ready and you told yourself it was luck, what was actually true about that moment? It was not luck. What was true was that in that moment, for whatever reason, you had not yet built the story that you were not ready. The story was absent, and so the action was clean, and so the result was real. You did not stumble into success. You walked straight toward it before the hesitation had time to assemble itself. That is what optimal timing actually is. Not the moment the calendar cooperates. Not the moment the economy softens or the savings account crosses some number you have been revising upward for 2 years. Optimal timing is the moment your identity is clear enough that your action stops asking the world for permission. You create that moment. It is not found. It is not given. It is not delivered by circumstances that finally align. It is built from the inside, and it is built by decision. And the decision is available to you right now, regardless of the month, the market, the state of your savings, or any other story the waiting has been using to keep itself in place. The permission slip you have been waiting for does not exist somewhere out there in the empty sky. You are the signal. You have always been the signal. The question was never whether the timing was right. The question was whether you were willing to be the source of it. In a later section, we will reach an idea about readiness, specifically about what the brain does in the moment right before a real commitment. When that point settles, it changes how you act from that moment forward that cuts across the standard story. But before you get there, carry this. Timing becomes perfect the moment the identity is ready. And the identity becomes ready the moment you stop waiting for timing to arrive. What is one thing you have been calling poorly timed? that is actually just unclaimed. Chapter 7. The authority you gave away without knowing. Nobody stole your power over money. That sounds like an accusation. You might want to push back against it, but stay with the claim for a moment because what comes after it matters more than the sting of hearing it. The power was not taken from you in one clean theft. It was handed over, piece by piece, in moments that felt like the right thing to do. Moments that felt like respect or obedience or just being realistic. And the reason you have not yet reclaimed it is not weakness. It is that you never saw the handoff happen. You cannot retrieve something you do not know you gave. This chapter is a map of the moments of transfer, not so you can feel cheated, not so you can blame the people who received what you offered, but so you can see the exact points in your own story where your authority over your financial life was quietly placed in someone else's hands. Once you see those points clearly, you can walk back to each one and take it home. The last chapter handed you a question, and that thread is still live. What is one thing you have been calling poorly timed that is actually just unclaimed? Sit with that a moment longer. This chapter is the answer living underneath that question. The timing was never the problem. The authority was, and here is where it started. Think about the first time someone older than you told you that money was not something you were supposed to understand. Maybe those exact words were never spoken, but the message arrived in other forms. A parent who changed the subject when bills came up. A household where money was either never discussed or discussed in a tone that communicated danger and shame in equal parts. A relative who laughed at the idea of investing and said something like, "People like us don't do that." You were young. You were absorbing the world as though every signal around you was a fact of nature, not a choice someone was making. And so you absorbed this one too. That was the first transfer point. Family. Not because your family was wrong about everything. Not because they did not love you, but because they handed you a framework for what someone like you does with money, and you took it without questioning it, the way children take everything. Whole. You built your early financial identity on top of that framework without ever deciding whether it was true. This is not blame. This is archaeology. You are digging up the original layer, not to destroy it, but to see it for what it is, a set of choices made by people who were also handed a framework they never questioned. Here is a question you can answer inside yourself right now. What was the unspoken rule about money in the house you grew up in, not what was said out loud? What was communicated by how people behaved, what they avoided, what they celebrated, what they feared? Whatever answer rises up for you, that rule is still operating somewhere in your decisions today, not because you chose it, because you inherited it before you had the language to refuse. Now move to the second transfer point. Institutions. School did something specific to you that nobody framed as financial damage at the time. It sorted you. It told you whether you were the kind of person who understood difficult things or the kind of person who needed help keeping up. Whatever sorting happened, whether you were praised as gifted or quietly told by a grade or a counselor or a test score that a certain ceiling was realistic, you filed that verdict away. You stopped measuring your capacity against what you actually wanted. You started measuring it against what the institution decided you were worth. This matters for wealth. Wealth requires a belief in your own capacity to learn and act outside of what has already been certified. Nobody hands you a degree in building something. Nobody grades your first investment. Nobody gives you a certificate before you start. And if you learned inside a system that conditioned you to wait for the grade before you trusted your own understanding, you are still waiting. Still looking for someone to tell you that you have done enough coursework. still deferring to an authority that outside that building does not exist. Ask yourself this one. Where in your financial life are you still waiting to be told you are ready? The third transfer point is more personal. For many people, it is more defended. Religion, or the broader spiritual framework you were raised inside. This is not an argument against faith. Faith is not the problem. The problem is a specific translation of spiritual teaching that told you wanting material things was a moral flaw. That desiring money was either sinful or simply incompatible with being a good person. That the truly evolved among us do not concern ourselves with the earthly ledger. Here is what that teaching cost you. It made your desire for financial security feel like a confession. Like wanting to earn well was evidence of spiritual immaturity. And so you learned to minimize your financial ambitions in your own mind, sometimes before anyone else could judge them. You beat the judgment to the punch by judging yourself first. The result is a genuine desire for a stable, secure, resourced life that you are only partially willing to admit to. Because somewhere in your formation, you handed that authority, the authority to say whether wanting was acceptable, to a framework that did not have your specific life in view. Before long, we will reach an idea about desire and discipline that cuts across the standard story. After that really registers, it changes how you act. The fourth transfer point arrived in your pocket. Social media is not just a distraction. It is a precision machine for eroding your sense of your own judgment. Every time you watched someone else's highlight reel and measured your behind the scenes against it, you made a small withdrawal from your own authority account. Every time you saw a version of success that made you feel behind, and then shifted your plan to match theirs, you gave a little more away. Not to that person specifically, to the idea that someone else knows better what success should look like for you. There is a man named David who spent 3 years building a freelance design business. Not fast, not loudly. He turned down venture capital twice because neither offer matched what he actually wanted: control over his schedule and enough income to live without anxiety. By his industry's metrics, he was slow. By social media's metrics, he was invisible. But by the time he was 31, he had exactly the business he designed. Not the one the algorithm would have applauded. Not the one his peers were chasing. He had built to a specific internal standard, and that standard belonged to him alone. The day someone called his growth underwhelming, he smiled. The person speaking had no idea what David had actually been building toward. The external judgment had no surface to land on. It simply fell away. That is what happens when you stop outsourcing the definition of success to whoever is watching. The fifth transfer point is the quietest one, and possibly the most damaging. It is the moment, not one moment, but dozens of them across your life, when you had an instinct about a financial decision and talked yourself out of it by asking what someone else would think. Not whether the decision was sound, not whether it aligned with what you actually wanted, but whether it would look right, whether you could defend it, whether the people who matter to you would approve. Go back to the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. Think about one decision you almost made: a job change, a side project, a purchase that was actually an investment, a refusal of something that drained you that you walked back because you imagined a room full of people judging you and decided the risk was not worth it. What happened to that decision? Where did it go? It did not disappear. Unclaimed decisions do not evaporate. They become the weight you feel when you say the timing was never right. The permission slip was always blank. That is the revelation the whole inventory has been building toward. No one transferred authority to themselves on your behalf. There was no forged signature, no hostile acquisition. You signed the slip voluntarily each time because signing it felt like the modest, sensible, socially responsible thing to do. Deference was praised as humility. Compliance was called maturity. Following someone else's map for your money was framed as being practical. And so you practiced it until it became invisible to you. Now here is what retrieval actually looks like. It is not a single dramatic act. It does not require confrontation with your parents, or abandonment of your beliefs, or deletion of your apps. Retrieval looks like noticing the moment a decision is forming and asking one question before you defer. The question is, whose voice is operating here right now? Is it yours? Or is it one of the frameworks you absorbed before you were old enough to choose? You do not have to know the whole history. You just have to catch the moment and ask. The empty sky is not waiting for a message to arrive. The signal has always been you. The authority was never fully removed. It was buried under 5 layers of borrowed permission. And you are standing at the surface of all 5 right now, shovel in hand, deciding whether to dig. You already know what you find when you get there. Every unclaimed decision in your past was not a failure of timing. It was a signature on a slip you did not have to sign. And the choice in front of you now is simple, even if it is not easy. Whose authority are you acting under? Chapter 8. Act now and the sign appears behind you. Something is slipping past you right now. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. It is slipping past you the way a river slips past a stone that has decided to stay put, quietly, continuously, and with complete indifference to your reasons for standing still. Every day you wait for confirmation before you move is a day. The compounding cost of inaction adds one more quiet layer to itself. The opportunity you did not take last month is not just last month's loss. It is the contact you did not meet, the credibility you did not build, the momentum that would have carried you somewhere better than where you are standing right now. And here is what makes this particular loss so hard to see. The mechanism causing it is invisible. It is not bad luck. It is not bad timing. It is a belief you were handed a long time ago, the belief that the sign comes first and the movement comes second. This chapter exists to show you exactly why that sequence is backwards and what happens the moment you reverse it. That question at the end of the last chapter is still hanging in the air. Whose authority are you acting under? It is worth sitting with. Because most people, when they answer honestly, discover the answer is nobody in particular. Not a mentor. Not a parent. Not a faith tradition. Not even themselves. The answer is a feeling of readiness that has not arrived yet, a feeling of certainty they are still waiting to earn. And that feeling, it turns out, has been standing at the door asking for something you were never told you had to give first. One open question is steering this chapter while the chapter unfolds. What actually happens in the life of someone who moves without certainty, who acts before the confirmation arrives? Not in theory. In practice, what do they experience? What do they find? Hold that question. We will come back to it. And when we do, the answer will be more specific than you expect. Remember the shape of your life 3 years earlier as it really was. Not in terms of what you had or did not have, but in terms of what you were waiting for. Was there something you were about to do, a business, a conversation, an investment, a creative risk, something that mattered to you? And did you wait? Did you wait for the right time, the right sign, the right feeling of readiness? Most people, when they sit with that question honestly, feel a specific kind of quiet ache, not guilt, something closer to grief, because they can see now from the distance of 3 years that the sign they were waiting for never came. And the moment they were waiting for simply passed. That is the mirror this chapter is holding up the whole time, not to wound you, to wake you up to what is still on the table right now today while you are listening to this. There is a woman named Dara who lived in a mid-sized city and worked in property management. She had spent 4 years studying the local real estate market the way some people study a language they are not sure they will ever speak. She knew the neighborhoods, the price histories, the vacancy rates. She had notebooks full of research. She had spreadsheets color-coded by risk level. What she did not have was certainty. She kept waiting for some final piece of information, some signal from the market or from someone she trusted that would tell her the moment had arrived. She told herself she was being diligent. She told herself patience was wisdom. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a colleague mentioned offhand that a duplex 2 streets from her office had just been listed under market value because the seller needed to close fast. Dara did not feel ready. She had never felt ready, but she made an offer that afternoon before she could talk herself out of it. She closed 3 weeks later. In the following 12 months, she watched the neighborhood appreciate in ways her spreadsheets had already predicted. She refinanced. She bought a second property. The third came 18 months after that. But here is what Dara told someone later, and this is the part that matters most. She said that once she moved, once she had actually bought that first property, she started seeing confirmation everywhere. She started noticing things she had always been looking at but not seeing, a pattern in the listings, a relationship between school rezoning and property values, a timing window that repeated every few years. The signs she had been waiting for before she moved were there the whole time. She just could not read them from a standing position. She had to be in motion to see them clearly. That is the rear-view mirror. The confirmation does not appear on the road ahead of you. It appears behind you, stacking up as you move, visible only to someone who is already in motion. Let that land for a moment before we keep going. The external validation loop has one central lie at its core. The lie is this: clarity precedes action. The loop tells you that the prepared person waits until conditions are clear before they commit. It makes this sound like wisdom. It sounds like the mature approach. It sounds like what responsible people do. And because it sounds reasonable, you repeat it to yourself. The days keep passing. The compounding cost keeps accumulating. The river keeps moving past the stone. The actual sequence is different. Action precedes clarity. Not reckless action, not action without preparation, but committed directional movement, the kind that says, I am going this way and I will adjust as I learn more. That kind of movement generates information that standing still never could. It surfaces the right people. It eliminates wrong paths faster than thinking about them ever would. It produces feedback that refines your direction in real time. The clarity comes from moving, not from waiting to move. Down the line in this book, we will reach an idea about readiness that cuts across the standard story. Once that becomes real to you, it changes how you act the next time you feel like you are not ready yet. For now, consider what it actually means to move without certainty. It does not mean ignoring risk. It means distinguishing between the risks you can calculate and the fear you are misreading as a calculated risk. Most people are not waiting because the downside is genuinely catastrophic. They are waiting because the discomfort of uncertainty feels like a warning signal, and they have been trained to treat that discomfort as meaningful information. It is not. Discomfort in the presence of opportunity is almost always just the sensation of growing past the boundary of your current self. It is not a stop sign. It is not even a yield sign. It is just the feeling of expansion. And expansion is supposed to feel like that. Here is what the empty sky teaches you if you are willing to look at it long enough. The sky offers no confirmation. It does not signal good days in advance or warn you about bad ones before you wake up. It is simply what is overhead while you are doing the thing. The people who built something real did not do it because the sky cooperated. They did it while the sky was doing nothing, which is to say while the sky was doing exactly what it always does. They moved, the sky remained the sky, and the work got done anyway. The permission slip you are waiting for is not coming from outside you. This is not a motivational claim. It is a practical one. Look at the actual evidence. Think of every time in your life you waited for permission and eventually received it. Where did that permission finally come from? Almost always it came from within you first. A moment when you stopped needing the outside confirmation and simply decided to proceed. The external confirmation often followed, but it followed. It did not lead. You led even if you did not recognize that is what you were doing. Now go back to the question from earlier. What actually happens in the life of someone who moves without certainty? This is what happens. In the first stage, nothing looks different from the outside. They feel uncertain. They make mistakes. They adjust. They feel uncertain again. This is the stage most people see and use as evidence that moving without certainty was wrong. But here is what those people are not watching closely enough. In the second stage, which begins quietly and without announcement, information starts to arrive that was not available before. The right conversation happens. A resource appears. A door that was locked turns out to have been unlocked the whole time, only reachable from this new position. And in the third stage, the person looks back and sees a trail of confirmation they could never have assembled from a standing start. The signs were there. They just only become visible in the rearview mirror of committed movement. You are the signal, not metaphorically, practically. When you act with direction and commitment, you send a signal into every network you are connected to, into the attention of everyone around you, into your own psychology and perception. That signal changes what comes back to you, not because of magic, because of how systems actually respond to inputs. A dormant signal gets no response. An active signal draws one. This is the thing that is so easy to miss when you are standing still, waiting for the universe or the market or the right person to make the first move. You were both waiting, and someone has to go first. The universe, whatever you believe about it, is not going to blink. It has been standing there this whole time. Patient, indifferent, and perfectly ready to respond the moment you give it something to respond to. You are the sign the situation was waiting for. So the question is not whether the confirmation will come. The question is how long you are going to make it wait. Chapter 9. Validation seeking is wealth repellent. Asking for permission before you act is not humility. It sounds like wisdom, checking with others, gathering input, making sure you are not moving too fast or too foolishly. It sounds like the careful, grounded thing that responsible people do. But here is what it actually is. It is a broadcast. The signal you send when you need someone else to confirm what you already know broadcasts one thing with complete clarity. You do not yet believe you are the source of your own authority. That single belief, or the absence of it, is the difference between the life that keeps almost arriving and the life that actually does. This chapter is about learning to read your own behavior as a signal. Not to shame yourself for what you find, but to see it with enough precision that you can change it. Because the confirmation you have been waiting for is delayed by exactly one thing, not circumstance, not timing. You are delaying it yourself every time you reach outside yourself for what you already hold inside. Here is the open loop. Why does wealth, real, lasting, expanding wealth, consistently arrive for people who seem to need it least? You will hear the full answer before this chapter ends. But first, you need to see what you have been doing. Recognition comes before anything else. Think about the last time you had a clear idea. Not a vague wish, but a real, specific idea, a business move, an investment, a creative direction, a price you wanted to charge. Think about what you did next. Did you sit with it and act? Or did you pick up your phone and send it to someone? Did you post it somewhere, frame it as a question, wait for responses to tell you whether it was worth pursuing? Did you almost do the thing, then pause, then find yourself explaining the plan to someone who had no particular expertise in it, just to see what they said? If any of that landed, stay here. This chapter is written for that exact moment. There is a woman named Dara who spent 3 years building what she called a side business, selling hand-restored furniture. She was meticulous about the work itself, the sanding, the staining, the sourcing of pieces others had discarded. The quality was obvious. Her results were undeniable. But every time Dara prepared to raise her prices, she did the same thing. She asked her sister, who meant well but shopped only at discount stores. She asked her existing clients, who had every incentive to say the lower price was fair. She asked in forums where strangers with no skin in the game voted on her worth. And every single time the consensus came back cautious. Not now, maybe later. The market is uncertain. People are careful with money these days. So Dara held her prices. For 3 years she held them, convinced she was being practical. Then one afternoon she raised them anyway. Not because someone told her to, because she got tired of asking. Her next 3 pieces sold faster than anything she had ever listed, at the higher number. Without a single comment about the price. The market had never been the problem. The signal she was broadcasting had been the problem. Dara was not asking because she needed data. She was asking because she needed permission. And the world kept doing what it always does when you ask it to validate you. It hesitated. Notice how the pause itself, that space between the story ending and the explanation beginning, already tells you something. You felt the lesson arriving. That feeling is internal authority working. You do not need someone to hand it to you. Now let us name the 3 behaviors, not as a list you recite, but as a mirror you hold up. The first is pre-action polling. This is when you have already decided something, or nearly decided, and you send it out for votes before you move. You call it gathering perspective. What it actually is, a search for an external permission slip before you trust your own. You know the polls are inconclusive. You know that the people you ask are not inside your life, your finances, your risk tolerance, your vision. But you ask anyway because the act of asking temporarily quiets the noise of self-doubt. The problem is that it only quiets it temporarily. And every time you outsource the decision, you train yourself to need the outsource more. The second behavior is invisible delay. This one is harder to catch because it disguises itself as preparation. You do not post the offer until you have had it reviewed. You do not send the email until someone reads it. You do not launch the thing until the branding is approved by people who never built a thing in their lives. Invisible delay is the gap between ready and the moment you convince yourself you are ready. It lives in the phrase "just waiting to hear back," and it compounds. Every week of invisible delay is a week the opportunity costs you momentum. A week you reinforce the belief that you are not enough on your own. The third is retroactive approval seeking. This one hits after you act. You make a decision, it goes well, and the first thing you do is find someone to tell. Not to celebrate, there is nothing wrong with sharing good news, but to have them confirm it was a good idea. You replay it to them in a way designed to earn their endorsement. When they give it, something in you settles. until the next decision when you need it all over again. This is the most insidious of the three because it feels like connection. It is not connection. It is a tax you are paying on your own confidence. Now stop for a moment. Go back to that point 3 years ago as honestly as you can, not in terms of what you had, but in terms of how you made decisions. Were you asking more people then than you do now? Or fewer? If more, something inside you has already been shifting. If fewer, ask yourself honestly whether you are moving toward internal authority or away from it. This is the mirror moment this chapter offers you. Not to make you feel behind, but to give you an honest reading of where your signal is pointed right now. 3 signals of internal authority look like this, and feel unmistakably different. The first is the quiet decision. Someone with internal authority makes the choice and then tells people afterward, if at all. There is no pre-approval process. There is assessment, yes. They think carefully, they run real numbers, they consider consequences. But the final move comes from inside, not from a chorus of external voices. When you watch this kind of person operate, you notice that their confidence is not loud. It is settled. They do not convince you their idea is good. They are already moving. The second signal is the uncelebrated start. People operating from internal authority begin things before they are told those things are viable. They do not wait for market research to validate the instinct. They do not wait to find someone who has done it before to say it can be done. They act on the signal they already received, and they refine as they go. This does not mean they are reckless. It means they are not requiring external certainty as a condition of internal action. The third signal is the clean no. Internal authority makes it possible to say no to people and opportunities without apologizing for it 3 times in the same sentence. When you are not dependent on external validation, you do not need every person in your circle to approve of your choices. You can decline the investment someone else is excited about. You can leave the room before consensus is reached. You can hold a position that the people around you do not share, not out of stubbornness, out of clarity. Now here is the answer to the open loop. Why does wealth keep arriving for people who seem to need it least? Here is the precise reason. Those people have stopped broadcasting the frequency of someone who is waiting to be found worthy. They are not sending out a signal that says, "Confirm me before I move." They are sending a signal that says, "I have already decided who I am and what I do." And wealth, money, opportunity, the right relationships, the unexpected door that opens, all of it is drawn not to desperation, but to the settled certainty of someone who is not asking for permission. This is not mysticism. It is behavioral. People want to partner with, invest in, buy from, and trust the person who does not need their approval to take the next step. Everything about how that person carries themselves makes it easier for the right things to land. A little later, you will come to a point about waiting that cuts across the standard story. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how you act in the moments you used to call dead ends. But for now, here is what to take from this chapter. The permission slip you have been circulating was never signed by anyone who had actual authority over your life. You have been sending it around a room full of people who are waiting for their own permission slip to arrive. Nobody in that room can give you what you are looking for, not because they do not care, but because they do not hold it. The signal you are looking for is not in their hands. The empty sky you have been reading for signs has always reflected the only source worth consulting. You are the broadcast. You have always been the broadcast. Stop asking the room. The frequency that wealth follows is the one that does not need an echo. Chapter 10. The Quiet Voice That Always Knew. Something is being lost right now. It makes no sound, not the dramatic loss of a failed business or a missed deadline. This is quieter than that. Every hour you spend listening to someone else's voice instead of your own is an hour your internal signal weakens. It does not disappear, but it fades the way a muscle fades when you stop using it, slowly and without announcement. Here is what makes this loss compound. The longer you ignore that signal, the more you reach for external voices to replace it. The louder those voices get, the harder it becomes to hear what was underneath them the whole time. You were not born without direction. You were taught to distrust the direction you already had. The question this chapter will answer is not where to find your inner voice. The question is why it went quiet and what it has been trying to tell you since before you learned to ask for permission. That frequency wealth follows, the one that does not need an echo, it has a source. The source is not a program, not a mentor, not a market signal. The source is you. Specifically, it is the part of you that knew before your brain had a chance to argue back. That part has a name in this chapter. Call it the signal, not inspiration, not gut feeling. The signal. Because a gut feeling sounds like something that comes and goes, unreliable and poetic. What you actually have is more structural than that. It is a persistent internal orientation. One that predates every opinion you were ever given about money, about your value, about what people like you are supposed to do. Here is the open loop. There is a specific moment in most people's financial lives, one single moment, when the signal was clearest and they walked away from it anyway. Not because they were weak, because they had been trained by then to walk away from exactly that kind of clarity. This chapter will return to that moment. But first, you need to understand the interference. Picture a radio, old analog, the kind with a tuning dial you turn by hand. The station you are looking for is broadcasting constantly. It never stopped. The signal is strong at the source, but between the source and the antenna there is interference, static, other stations bleeding through. The dial keeps drifting, so you spin it trying to find the clear channel. Sometimes you get a few seconds of clarity before the noise returns. Most people, when they cannot find the station, assume the problem is the antenna. They buy a new one. They upgrade. They take a course, hire a coach, read another book, consult another person. But the antenna was never the problem. The interference was the problem. And the interference had a source too. The interference is not random. It was constructed. That is not a conspiracy claim. It is a structural observation. Every external voice that profits from your uncertainty has an incentive to keep you uncertain. The financial media profits when you are anxious about markets. The self-help industry profits when you believe the answer is one more purchase away. The social systems around money, family, culture, religion, peer groups, all of them have a stake in keeping you inside the range of decisions that feel familiar to everyone around you. This is not malicious. It is just the way attention works. Louder voices fill the space that quieter voices leave. And your signal, that persistent internal orientation, does not fight for airtime. It does not compete. It simply continues to broadcast underneath all the noise, waiting for you to clear the channel. Look back at the season you were in 3 years earlier as it really was. Not in terms of your bank account, in terms of what you already knew. What did you know then that you have not yet acted on? What sense did you have about the direction your work should take? What financial move felt right but also felt too simple, too obvious, too much like something you were not qualified to trust? Sit with that for a moment, because that knowing did not arrive 3 years ago. It was there before. You have been carrying it. You have been explaining it away. And you have been waiting for an external signal to give you permission to treat your own signal as real. That is the cost, not a dramatic number, a quiet, compounding cost. Every year you defer to someone else's voice over your own. You pay in options you did not take, in a direction you did not move, in a version of your financial life that you could see clearly but could not quite believe you were allowed to step into. Now here is where the story lives. Marcus was 31 years old, working a logistics job in a mid-sized city when he noticed something. Every Friday afternoon after his shift, he would drive past a block of storefronts near his apartment. One storefront had been empty for 2 years. The sign in the window said available and listed a number. Marcus had a specific idea, not a vague dream, a specific idea. He had worked in 3 different food businesses before his current job. He knew the operations. He knew the margins. He had run the numbers quietly on his phone during lunch breaks for 6 months. The idea was not half-formed. It was solid. But every time he drove past that storefront, he did the same thing. He thought about who would know better than him. He thought about the people he had seen fail in similar businesses. He thought about what his uncle had said about risk, what his coworker had said about the economy, what a podcast host had said about timing. He called the number once, listened to the voicemail, hung up without leaving a message. The storefront sat empty for another year. Then someone else opened exactly what Marcus had imagined, not the same in every detail, but close enough that when he drove past the opening weekend, he felt it physically. He did not lose because he lacked vision. He lost because he had been trained to treat his own signal as a rough draft that needed outside approval before it could be submitted. The store opened. Marcus kept driving past it. What Marcus experienced in that Friday afternoon moment of clarity, that was not inspiration. That was the signal, unfiltered, unambiguous, fully formed. And the voices that crowded it out were not wiser than the signal. They were simply louder. That is all. This is the revelation this chapter was built to deliver. Hold it without softening it. The signal was never absent, not once, not in the years when you felt most lost, not in the moments when you were most certain you had no idea what to do. It was broadcasting the entire time. You were not receiving it because the frequency had been cluttered, not by your own failure, but by the sheer accumulated volume of every external voice that told you your internal read was not enough. Removing interference is not a dramatic act. It does not require a retreat or a ceremony or a decision to reinvent yourself. It requires something smaller and more precise. It requires you to notice which voices you consult and why. Specifically, when you are about to make a financial decision and you feel a clear internal orientation toward one direction, and then you pause to ask someone else what they think, notice what happens next. Almost always, the external voice introduces doubt, and the doubt feels like wisdom. It feels like due diligence. But often it is just noise landing on a signal that was already clear. This does not mean stop learning. It does not mean stop listening to people with real experience. It means this. Learn to distinguish between consulting someone for new information and consulting someone for permission to trust what you already know. Those are 2 entirely different acts. One makes your signal stronger. The other teaches your signal that it needs a cosigner. You do not need a cosigner. Here is the specific moment this chapter promised to return to. That moment in your financial life when the signal was clearest and you walked away from it. Maybe it was a job offer, an investment you researched completely and then stepped back from, a conversation you did not start, a number you did not say out loud when someone asked what you wanted. You do not have to remember the exact details. You already know which moment this is. You felt it when this chapter mentioned it the first time. The signal recognized itself. That moment is not a failure to be analyzed. It is a data point. It shows you what the signal actually feels like in your body, in real conditions, under real pressure. Because now you know what you are looking for. You know what it feels like when the signal is clear and the interference is rising. And knowing that difference is the beginning of strengthening your reception. Further on, you will come to a point about confidence, about where it actually comes from and whether you build it before or after the action that cuts across the standard story. When you see how that contradiction resolves, it will change the specific order in which you do things. But for now, the task is smaller. The task is quiet. The task is this. The next time you feel that clear internal orientation and you reach for an outside voice to confirm it, pause. Not to ignore the outside voice forever. Pause long enough to notice that the signal was already there before you reached. Notice that it did not arrive because someone validated it. It was already present. The signal is not something you develop. It is something you clear the space to hear. The question is not whether it is speaking. The question is what you have been placing in front of it, and whether you are ready to move that aside. Chapter 11. The last time you will ask anyone for permission. Waiting for permission is not humility. It sounds like it. It looks like patience, like wisdom, like the careful restraint of someone who knows their place. But it is not any of those things. It is the single most expensive habit you have ever formed. And you have been paying for it every day without realizing the bill was even running. Here is what this chapter is going to ask you to do. Not to believe differently. Not to feel differently first. But to act as if the last person whose approval you needed was you. Because they were. They always were. And by the time this chapter ends, you will understand not just why that is true, but how to make it permanent. You moved something aside. That is where we left each other. You recognized there was a signal underneath the noise. You admitted, quietly or loudly, that you had been stacking things in front of it: doubt, second opinions, half-finished ideas you kept half-finished on purpose, so no one could fully reject them. You moved that aside. Good. Now there is one more thing standing between you and the life you keep describing to yourself late at night. One more gate. This chapter is about who has been holding the key. Here is the question that has been running underneath everything in this book. The one that opened in chapter 1 when you first looked up at an empty sky and waited. Who told you that you needed telling? Think about that. Not rhetorically. Think about the first time in your life you wanted something financially significant, something real, not a wish, but a plan, and you turned to look at someone else before you moved. A parent, a partner, a mentor, a version of God you had been handed by someone else. You turned, and in that turning you handed the deed of your authority to whoever was standing there. And most of them did not even know they were holding it. Most of them were doing the same thing to someone else. That is the loop. That is the villain in this story. Not a person. Not a culture exactly, though culture is where it lives. The loop is the system that taught you to root every major decision through external confirmation before you could trust it. It trained you with years of reward and withdrawal. It gave you gold stars when you checked with others first. It gave you the quiet warmth of approval. Then it made you addicted to that warmth so that without it, a decision felt cold, uncertain, dangerous. And so you kept asking. You kept turning to look. And the original signal, the one that was always you, kept waiting. Renata knew the loop by a different name. She called it respect. She was 28 years old, running a small alterations business out of a rented shop space, and she was good at it. Not just with a needle with people. She could look at someone standing in an ill-fitting jacket and see exactly what needed to shift. Customers came back. Word spread. And then a commercial lease opened up on a street with real foot traffic. The rent was steep but manageable. Renata had done the numbers 3 times over 3 weeks, and each time the numbers said yes. She did not sign. She called her father, who had never owned a business. She called her older sister, who told her it felt risky. She called a woman she admired from a local entrepreneurship group, who said the economy was uncertain. She called her boyfriend, who said maybe wait another year. None of them had seen her numbers. None of them had sat across from her customers. None of them had felt the specific current of that opportunity moving past like a train slowing down at a platform. But they all had opinions. And Renata held their opinions in her hands like stones and watched the lease get signed by someone else. She told herself she had been prudent. She told herself she had respected wisdom. But alone in the shop, threading a machine at 11 at night, she knew what she had actually done. She had handed her authority to people who did not have the information to use it. She had outsourced the most important decision of that year to people who loved her but could not possibly have known what she knew. The space that opened next was smaller and cost more per square foot, but here is what Renata did with that fact. She did not punish herself with it. She did the one thing that changes everything. She named the last permission she had been waiting for. She sat down and wrote in a notebook the words, "I have been waiting for my father to tell me I am ready." She underlined it. She stared at it for a long time, and then she wrote underneath it, "He cannot tell me that. He does not have that information. Only I do." That was the ceremony, not dramatic, not loud. Just a woman alone with the truth of who actually held the authority over her life, writing it down until the fog cleared. Return to the season you were in 3 years earlier, as it really was. Think about the decisions you were circling, the ones you kept bringing to other people, the ones that went quiet in other people's hands because they gave them back to you lighter, less certain, shaved down to something everyone could agree was safe. Think about what you set down because someone you trusted did not share your specific fire for it. Now ask yourself, were they wrong about everything? No. Were they wrong about that one thing, the thing that was yours to decide? Most likely, yes. This is the mirror moment, and it is not comfortable. But discomfort here is not a warning. It is the feeling of something accurate landing. The external validation loop does not go away because you understand it. Understanding is only the beginning. The loop has grooves in your nervous system, literal patterns worn into the way you process decisions. Understanding it intellectually is like understanding that a road is icy. That does not stop you from sliding. What stops you from sliding is a different set of tires. What you need is not more insight. You need a new operating procedure, and it needs to happen at the level of action, not analysis. So this chapter is going to give you one. It is a declaration. It is meant to be spoken. Not thought, not read silently, spoken. You do not have to be alone. You do not have to be standing in a field or holding a candle or performing anything for anyone. You just have to mean it and say it out loud and let your own voice carry it into the air of wherever you are. Say this: I am the authority on what I am ready for. I give myself full permission to move on what I know. I will no longer wait for a signal that was always coming from inside me. The permission I was looking for was always mine to give. That is it. Not elaborate. Say it like you mean it, because you do, even if part of you is still deciding whether to fully believe it. Here is what happens next. Nothing dramatic on the outside. The room does not change. The sky does not send a reply. You will not feel suddenly unstoppable. What you will feel if you let yourself is quiet. A specific kind of quiet that comes from something ending. The loop ending. Not forever without effort, but ending now in this moment by a deliberate act of internal authority. You are not asking anymore. You are deciding. And here is where authority and arrogance part ways, because they have been confused in your mind long enough. Arrogance is deciding without information. It is the person who never consults anyone because they secretly fear what consultation might reveal. That is not what this is. You will still ask questions. You will still seek counsel. You will still put your plans in front of people who can improve them. But asking for improvement is not the same as asking for permission. Consulting is not outsourcing. The difference is this. When you consult from authority, you gather information and then you decide. When you consult from the loop, you gather approval and then you follow. One of those produces wealth. One of those produces a smaller and smaller version of the life you are trying to build. Retrieved authority is not arrogance. It is the operating condition without which every wealth decision you have been postponing remains postponed. Every investment you almost made. Every price you wanted to charge but lowered because you asked someone who was not your customer. Every offer you softened because you wanted the room to nod before you committed. Authority is what was missing in all of those moments. Not courage exactly. Not confidence, which people talk about like it grows on a vine. Authority. The quiet internal fact that you are the deciding vote on your own life. The permission slip culture gave you was a blank one. It said, fill in who you are waiting for and wait. You have been filling it in for years. A different parent, a different mentor, a different economic moment, a different sign in the sky. But the sky was always empty of the thing you were searching for because that thing was never out there. The signal you were waiting for was always you. Not the uncertain version of you that shows up in other people's living rooms asking with your eyes. The version that knows. The version that has done the numbers 3 times and watches the numbers say yes each time. The version that is, right now, listening to this. Renata signed the next lease alone. She did not ask anyone. She called her father afterward not for permission but to share news. That is the difference, and the shop is still open. You have been moving things aside. You have been locating the signal underneath the noise. Now take the last step, the formal one, the one that closes the loop for good. Soon, you will come to a point about readiness that cuts across the standard story. Once that lands, it shifts how you act. But that is not yet. Right now, there is only this. The permission you were looking for never required anyone else's signature. What would you do today if you knew that, not just in your mind, but all the way down? Chapter 12. You are the signal, not the receiver. Every civilization that has ever risen left behind the same unanswered question. It was scratched into walls, sung into ceremonies, buried inside the oldest stories. Across languages no living person speaks, across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. The question is always some version of this. Why do certain people seem to draw life toward them while others spend their whole existence reaching outward and finding nothing? It was never about talent. It was rarely about circumstance. The ones who seemed to understand something the others did not were not waiting for the world to show them the way. They had already decided they were the way. That pattern is older than any philosophy you have studied or any faith you have inherited. And right now, standing at the edge of everything this book has been building toward, that pattern is yours to step into. Here is the question that has been sitting quietly underneath this entire chapter, waiting for you to notice it. If you have been a receiver all your life, scanning the sky for a signal, watching for a sign, waiting for permission to arrive from somewhere outside yourself, what exactly were you hoping to receive? Think about that for a moment. Not rhetorically. Actually think about it. Because most people, if they are honest, cannot answer that question with any precision. They were waiting for confidence, for certainty, for some feeling that would arrive one morning and announce that now, finally, it was safe to move. They were waiting for something that felt like permission. And that waiting was not idle. It had a cost. Picture the season you were in 3 years earlier as it really was, not in broad strokes specifically. Where were you living? What was the number in your bank account? What did you tell yourself was standing between you and the life you actually wanted? Chances are, the story you told yourself 3 years ago sounds familiar. You are still carrying some version of it today. The specific details have changed. The feeling underneath has not. That feeling is what happens when a person spends years as a receiver. You learn the posture so well that it starts to feel like your natural state. You forget that the posture was ever a choice. That is the cost, not the things you did not have. The time you spent waiting to become someone who already existed inside you. Here is a story. Marcus was a 31-year-old graphic designer. He had spent 4 years building other people's brands while his own sat in a folder on his desktop labeled, and he actually used this word someday. He had the skill. He had the clients who told him he was talented. He had the savings to give himself 6 months of runway. He had everything except the moment. He kept waiting for the moment. He told himself he needed a sign that the time was right. A slower month at his current job, or a client who really believed in him, or some convergence of circumstances that would make the leap feel obvious rather than terrifying. One afternoon, his landlord raised the rent. Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a pen and a blank piece of paper, and something in him snapped quiet. Not loud, quiet. He wrote 3 words at the top of the page. He wrote, "I am ready," not because the circumstances had changed, because he finally understood that the circumstances had never been the thing he was waiting for. He launched his studio the following Monday. Within 8 months, he had replaced his income. The sign he had been waiting for was the 4 years of preparation already inside him. He had been the signal the entire time. Notice what did not happen in that story. No opportunity fell from the sky. No mentor appeared. No perfect moment arrived. What happened was far simpler and far more demanding. Marcus stopped pointing his attention outward and turned it inward. What he found there was not emptiness. It was the answer. That is the revelation this chapter has been circling. You are not someone who receives the signal. You are the signal itself. This is not a metaphor. Work through what it actually means. A signal does not wait for permission to transmit. A signal does not scan the environment hoping something will activate it. A signal generates. It projects outward. It organizes the frequencies around it simply by existing in its full expression. When you have been living as a receiver, you have been doing the opposite. Dimming yourself down to a frequency so low that nothing can find you, and then wondering why nothing arrives. The permission slip you were waiting for does not exist on a desk somewhere. No one is going to sign it and slide it under your door. The empty sky you kept watching for signs in was always just sky, and the signal you were waiting to receive was you, the version of you that decides, that moves, that acts on the basis of its own authority, not the world's approval. This is where the wealth identity actually lives, not in a number, not in a strategy, in the posture, in the cellular decision to stop being the one who waits and start being the one who generates. The open loop from the beginning of this chapter deserves its answer now. You were hoping to receive certainty, but certainty is not something that arrives. Certainty is something you produce by moving before you feel ready and watching yourself not collapse. Every time you have ever done something hard before you felt prepared, certainty was what you built on the other side of it. You were generating signal all along. You just did not recognize what you were producing. This shift from receiver to signal is not a single dramatic moment. It does not arrive with weight and ceremony the way you might have imagined. It arrives the way Marcus's moment arrived. Quiet, specific, one sentence written at the top of a blank page. The bigness of it is invisible from the outside. On the inside, it is the difference between a life that waits and a life that moves. Later on, you will come to a point about the moment of beginning that cuts across the standard story. When that becomes clear, it shifts how you act every single day. But for right now in this chapter, stay with this. You are not behind. You are not waiting for the right version of yourself to arrive from somewhere in the future. That version is not coming. It is not coming because it is already here, wearing your face, using your voice, holding every piece of experience you have gathered across every year you have lived. The signal was never missing. It was only muffled. And the thing that muffled it was a story about needing something external before you could begin. What would you do today if you knew that, not just in your mind, but all the way down? That question ended the last chapter. This chapter is the answer. You would stop asking the question. You would already be moving. Everything you were waiting for was waiting for you to stop waiting. Chapter 13. This book was the sign you were waiting for. Read that again. Not the title You are already here. You pressed play, or you opened the page, or someone sent this to you and something in you said yes before your thinking mind had a chance to object. That yes is not an accident. And what happened before that yes, the restlessness, the sense that something needed to change, the feeling that you were running out of patience with your own delay, that was not an accident either. You did not stumble into this. You arrived. The only question this chapter intends to leave you with is the one that was always underneath everything else. The question that opened this book and has been waiting quietly in every chapter since. Now 13 chapters in, standing here at the edge of the last turn, the answer is finally close enough to touch. Here is what nobody tells you about the sign you were looking for. It was never going to come from outside. Not from the sky, not from a stranger's casual comment that hits you strangely, not from a number that repeats itself on a clock, not from a book, not from a podcast, not from a voice that arrives fully formed with instructions. Those things can confirm what is already moving in you. They cannot create motion where there is none. Revisit the season you were in 3 years earlier as it really was. Not in general terms specifically. What were you worried about? What had you already decided was probably not going to happen for you? What were you still waiting to begin? You may have been waiting for money, for time, for someone to believe in you, waiting for the right conditions to line up so that moving forward finally felt safe. And somewhere in that waiting, you picked up a signal. Something reached you through noise and through busyness and through all the very reasonable reasons you had to keep your head down and stay small. Something reached you, and you followed it here. That is not ordinary. Most people do not follow the signal. Most people feel it and then explain it away before the end of the day. There is a woman named Renata. She was 31, working a scheduling job at a logistics company, making enough to stay and not enough to leave. She had a folder on her laptop titled simply Later. Inside that folder were 3 business plans she had written across 7 years, each one more detailed than the last, each one waiting for the same thing: permission. She was not reckless. She was not a dreamer without discipline. She had done the work of thinking. What she had not done was recognize that the thinking itself was the signal. One evening, driving home from a shift that had run long, she heard something through her car speakers that stopped her mid-thought. She pulled into a parking lot and sat there with the engine running for 20 minutes. Not because the words were magic, because something inside her had been ready for exactly this long enough that when the match arrived, There was no question. She heard the signal because she had already become someone who could. She did not open one of her 3 business plans that night. She opened all 3. That is the thing about readiness. It does not look like calm. It looks like someone finally done with the cost of waiting. You called this. That is the part worth sitting inside for a moment. It contradicts what the external validation loop has been teaching you since you were old enough to understand approval. The loop says wait. It says get confirmation. It says make sure someone who knows more than you agrees before you move. It says the sign is out there, and your job is to watch for it with enough patience and faith. What the loop does not say, what it carefully never says, is that the watching is its own trap. A person who waits for the sign has quietly decided that something outside them holds authority over something inside them. That is the arrangement. That is the deal you agreed to without knowing you agreed to it. The permission slip was never sent from anywhere. It was always in your hand. You found this book because something in you was already moving. Call it readiness. Call it a quiet refusal to accept that this is all there is. Call it the version of you that is slightly further down the road, looking back and saying, come on, it is not as far as you think. Whatever you call it, that force was yours before this book existed. This book did not generate it. You generated this book, in the sense that you generated the conditions for receiving it. You became someone who would say yes. That is the only miracle here, and it belongs entirely to you. Now close the open loop that this book carried since its first words. In the beginning, there was a signal you were waiting for, something that would finally tell you it was time. Something that would confirm you were not foolish, not naive, not chasing something reserved for people luckier or smarter or better positioned than you. Something that would make the risk feel less like a cliff edge and more like a next step. You were waiting for the sign. The whole premise of this book rested on that ache. And now here, with 1 chapter left, the callback arrives. Not as a trick, not as a reframe designed to flatter you into feeling good. It arrives as a fact. The sign was the search. The moment you felt restless enough to look, you had already answered the question. Renata did not change her life in the parking lot that night. She changed it in the 7 years she spent writing business plans in a folder called Later, refusing to fully let go of what she believed was possible, refusing to stop even when stopping would have been so much easier. The voice she heard was the trigger. She was the weapon. This book was your trigger. You were already the weapon. So what do you do with that? You stop treating readiness as a future state. You stop saying, when I am more ready, when the timing is cleaner, when I have a little more saved, when the kids are older, when the season changes, when I feel certain. Certainty is not the precondition for movement. Movement is the precondition for certainty. You already know this. You have felt it in small doses every time you did something before you were completely sure and discovered that completion was the teacher, not the preparation. The empty sky never held your answer. You looked up because you were the kind of person who still believed an answer existed. That belief was yours. The sky was just sky. Everything you were waiting for was waiting for you to stop waiting. And you did. You are here. You followed something you could not quite name through 13 chapters of a book that kept insisting you were more than a person waiting for permission. Which means, right now, in this exact moment, you are already doing the thing this whole book was pointing toward. You are acting on your own readiness. You brought yourself here. Not luck, not coincidence, not fate dropping something in your lap while you sat still. You moved. You reached. You said yes when the easier answer was to keep scrolling, to close the tab, to wait for a better time that would have looked, as it always does, exactly like right now. Later in this book, you will encounter the final invitation, something that directly contradicts what most people believe about where lasting change actually begins. And once you receive it, the entire journey of this book will resolve in a way that makes everything that came before it feel like preparation for a single clear act. The sign you were waiting for did not come from somewhere else. It came from you. Chapter 14. Move. The sky is already empty of excuses. Every culture that has ever existed has had a version of this moment, a threshold, a place where the person you were stands face to face with the person you are capable of becoming, and the only thing between them is a single step. The ancient stories call it different things: a crossing, a leap, a departure from the known shore. But across all of them, in every language, in every century, the pattern holds. The ones who moved became the story. The ones who waited became the warning. You are not reading history right now. You are standing at that threshold. And everything you have carried through this book, every question you have turned over, every old story you have started to release, it has all been moving you toward this exact breath, this exact moment, this exact choice. It came from you. That was where this ended last time. That sentence deserves a moment to fully land. It is not just a conclusion. It is a beginning. Everything that felt like it was coming from outside, the opportunity that arrived, the conversation that opened a door, the sudden clarity at 2 in the morning when you finally saw the path, all of it originated in you. You were the signal. You were the source. And if that has been true all along, then the question that has haunted you, when will I finally get my sign, has already been answered. It was answered from the very first page. Now here is the open question that has been living quietly underneath all of this. If you already are the sign, why do you keep standing still? Hold that. The answer is not what most people assume. You will feel it before this chapter ends. Call up the season you were in 3 years earlier as it really was. Not in a vague, general way. Really go back. What were you worrying about at night? What did you want that you did not have? What were you waiting for before you could start? Now look at where you are standing today. Some of what you feared never arrived. Some of what you wanted came, maybe wearing a different shape than you imagined. And some of those things you waited to start, you are still waiting. That gap is not failure. It is information. It is the cost measured in years of the external validation loop. That quiet system trained you carefully and consistently to believe that authority over your own life lived somewhere else. In a sign, in an approval, in a perfect alignment of circumstances that would finally make it safe to move. That system is very good at what it does. It does not announce itself. It wears the clothing of wisdom and patience and spiritual discernment. It sounds like maturity. It sounds like waiting for the right moment. But what it produces in the end is a person who has grown very sophisticated at standing still while calling it preparation. You have been prepared long enough. The empty sky was never withholding from you. That is the thing that takes a moment to absorb. When you looked up and found no signal, no burning message, no undeniable cosmic confirmation, the sky was not silent because you were unworthy or unready or because the timing was wrong. The sky was empty because the sky was never the address. The permission you were looking for was never stored up there. It was always here, in the body that has carried you through every hard year, in the mind that found this book, in the desire that refused to go quiet no matter how many times you told it to be reasonable. That desire is a signal. It is precise. It is specific to you, and it has never stopped transmitting. So here is the revelation this entire book has been building toward, stated plainly, without decoration. The waiting was not protecting you. It was costing you. Every day spent scanning the horizon for a permission slip that was already in your hand was a day spent paying rent to a system that was never on your side. That system ends today, not because you have changed everything about your external circumstances, not because the path ahead is suddenly clear and guaranteed. It ends today because you have decided, right now, that you are done needing it. Now, the open question. If you already are the sign, why do you keep standing still? Here is the answer. You keep standing still not because you lack courage and not because you lack vision. You keep standing still because movement requires you to stop being the person who is waiting. That identity, the one who waits, who watches, who needs one more confirmation, has been with you a long time. Letting it go feels like losing something, but what you are actually losing is the weight. And what you are stepping into is the only version of yourself that can do what you have been saying you want to do. A woman named Dara had a business idea she had been holding for 4 years. She had research notes. She had a name picked out. She had a folder on her computer with 47 documents, each one more detailed and more complete than the last. She was waiting, she told herself, until she had enough savings, until the market was clearer, until her situation was more stable. She was waiting for a sign that it was safe. One evening, she opened the folder and counted the documents. 47. She had spent 4 years building a monument to waiting. That night, she did not launch the business. She did one thing. She sent one email to one person who had told her 2 years earlier that he believed in her idea. She pressed send. He responded the next morning. Within 3 months, she had her first paying client, not because the sign arrived, because she stopped waiting for it. She did not leap off a cliff. She took one step. That is your instruction, not a philosophy, not a principle for someday. One step taken before this day ends. Something real and specific. A message you have been drafting and deleting, a call you have been delaying, an account you have been meaning to open, a conversation you have been rehearsing in your head for months. One action, not a plan for the action, not a further preparation for the action itself. The sky has been empty this whole time, and it turns out that was the answer. There was nothing up there because everything required was already down here. In you, in the way you think when no one is watching. In the way you keep circling back to the same desire, the same idea, the same version of a life that will not let you alone. That persistence is not wishful thinking. That is your signal refusing to be ignored. You came to this book looking for a sign. Somewhere early in those first pages, a question was planted. What if the sign you were looking for was the very act of looking? What if the search itself was the signal that you were ready? That question has been answered now, not by argument, but by the fact that you are still here at the final words of the final chapter, leaning forward. That leaning is not nothing. That leaning is everything. There will not be a more perfect day. There will not be a clearer signal. The path will not widen and flatten and announce itself with a fanfare that makes the decision easy. It will look from the outside a lot like today, ordinary, a little uncertain. The difference is that today you move through it as the authority, not as someone waiting to be chosen, not as someone who needs the sky to confirm what they already know. The voice you will hear when you take that step is your own voice, not a whisper from somewhere else. Yours, steady. Certain in the only way that matters, not certain of the outcome, but certain of the source. You are the sign. Now move.